Hello, everyone. So great to bring another episode of the Legends of Sport podcast to all of you. I'm your host, Andy Bernstein. So to help celebrate Women's History Month, I am thrilled to have one of the most iconic women in the history of sports as my guest today, basketball legend Ann Meyers Drysdale. To say that Annie is a trailblazer would be a huge understatement. In fact, she accomplished so many firsts in her career as an athlete and broadcaster that the list is too long to fully mention, but here's some highlights. Annie was the first high school player to make the U.S. national team and started on the first women's Olympic basketball team in 1976, winning a silver medal. She was the first female athlete to earn a 4-year scholarship after the passage of Title IX and had a stellar career at UCLA, leading them to a national championship in her senior year, and also was the first 4-time All-American in college, male or female. She was the first and to this day, the only woman to sign an NBA contract, which she did with the Indiana Pacers in 1979. When she moved to the broadcast booth, she was the first woman to work as an NBA color analyst, and in 1984, she became the first woman to broadcast women's Olympic basketball. Annie was the first female athlete inducted into the UCLA Athletics Hall of Fame. She's a member of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, the Pac-12 Hall of Honor, International Women's Sports Foundation Hall of Fame, and first woman inducted into the FIBA Hall of Fame. So I probably left out a bunch, but you can find all her accolades as well as her own account of her personal journey in her terrific autobiography, You Let Some Girl Beat You? Great title. So, folks, enjoy this episode with the legendary Ann Meyers Drysdale. And as always, I'll see you on the backside. Well, I want to welcome Ann Meyers Drysdale to the Legends of Sport podcast. So honored to have you as a guest, Annie. How are you?
Andy, I'm good. It's so good to see you, even though it's through the Zoom. And, our friendship has endured a lot of years. And so I'm glad we're able to connect at least this way.
Yeah, me too. I was trying to think how long we've known each other. And, a passage in your book really stood out when you talked about being in Dodger Town and the team photographer at that time who took that particular picture you were referring to was not me, but it made me remember being down in Dodger Town and probably meeting you there at some point. But you had, I just want to talk about that story for a second because you had this great story in your book, by the way, fantastic book, about playing pickup basketball with Tommy Lasorda, our dear departed friend who we all adored and loved. Yeah. And I can totally relate to that. I had to get stitches from Tommy because he threw me onto the gravel and then dared me to call a foul, right?
I love it.
He was too much, man.
So competitive.
Yeah, but our paths have crossed for years and years. I mean, in the NBA, the WNBA, of course, USA Basketball, even Special Olympics, because I handled the content for the 2015 World Games out here. So that was pretty
losing
cool.
Our dear friend Rayford Johnson too.
Yeah, with Rayford Johnson is the greatest. Wow, we lost so many people this year. I can't even think about it. Yeah. It's unbelievable. So you're splitting your time between LA and Phoenix, or what is?
I am.
Yeah.
I am. I kept my home in Southern California, but I just rent in Arizona. My sister owns a home, so I rent from her when she's in town, and certainly love continuing to work for the Phoenix Suns and Mercury, the organization, as a vice president and broadcaster. I came in as the general manager for the Mercury, and then after I think it was about 7 or 8 years, they asked me to kind of just do the broadcasting and community service work. And so I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Speaking of Phoenix, I actually shot the Suns last night against the Lakers. I mean, this will come out a few weeks later, but so exciting to see the vibe back in the Valley with the Suns. I mean, it's been a while. But that team, I got to say, and I'm not saying this because you're my guest today, but this is probably like the most athletic team I've seen this year in the NBA. These guys could just fly. They're amazing.
Yeah, it's taken a while, certainly with the transition and so many different coaches, but Monty Williams and James Jones have, really put together a wonderful team. And I thought last year, even with Ricky Rubio in the backcourt, but, certainly Chris, he set the foundation. And certainly Devin Booker has just continued to get better and better and better. And with Chris Paul in the backcourt certainly makes a difference. DeAndre Ayton's getting better, and Bridges and Cam Johnson, and bringing Jay Crowder in, and Dario and Frank Kaminsky back. So, we got some young talent, and they're hungry.
Yeah.
and they want respect. And I think having the veterans of Paul and Crowder have really helped kind of give consistency and understanding what the next level, what it takes to get to the next level.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Chris Paul, without a doubt, one of my top favorite guys of all time. I mean, I just adore that guy and everything he does off the court. He's just amazing. He and his family. So you guys are so lucky to have him, and he's lucky to be there.
Well, and the great leadership again with Monty Williams. I mean, he doesn't get too high or too low, but he's constantly teaching.
Yeah.
And I go back to the UCLA days of Coach John Wooden, and he always considered himself a teacher. And I look at somebody like Monty Williams, who to me is a teacher.
Yeah, for sure. So Annie, doing a lot of research for this myself and my producer Veronica, and I know you, but I don't know you that well. But everything that I read about you and all the people I reached out to, I mean, I know that you're universally known as a nice person, right? But I didn't realize that you could be that nice, like a person. I mean, Dr. J and your good friend who wrote the foreword to your book. I mean, he said in your book, he said, Annie was mentally as tough as anyone I've ever known and always seemed able to find a way to deliver when the pressure was on. And then he says, underneath that sweetness, there's this strength, right? So let's go back to growing up in a big family, a competitive family, where you said that your parents were gender blind, right? And you talk about this shyness that you have. So I'm trying to figure out like sweetness, shyness, competitiveness, edge, like how all those things came together.
Well, I'm sure growing up in a big family, certainly you're vying for attention. My folks are from Milwaukee, and my dad played basketball at Marquette. They moved out to Southern California after they got married in 46. My oldest sister, Patty, was born in 47. And I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters, but Patty was probably the best athlete in the family. But in saying that, the fact that our parents did encourage their daughters to play sports as much as their sons, just the work ethic. My dad worked for Sears for over 30 years. My mom was an unbelievable housemaker, where, whether it was doing the laundry or ironing or cooking food and getting lunches and making beds and, making sure that we were all, in order. When we lived in Chicago, we went to the parochial schools, so we had uniforms. Then we moved back out to Southern California in the early 60s, going through the public schools. But, it just following in the footsteps of my sisters and brothers. And so the competitiveness was there because we were always playing sports. I was in between 2 boys. And so I idolized my brother David, who was 2 years older than I was. I would go to my brother Mark and Tom's football games at high school. We always supported each other. But I was the middle child of 11, so I was very insecure, very shy, but I'd always tag along with my brothers. And so I knew that it was a safe haven being with them, whether they wanted me there or not. But certainly going to the playgrounds and playing, whether we were playing over the line or 500 or football or basketball or hitting tennis balls or whatever, but riding bikes and playing Monopoly or kick the can, we were all competitive. So, but there was an intensity about our family on how we played the sports, not just with me, but from my sister Patty, Tom, Mark, Kathy, David, just all the way down. And then you had Jeff, Susie, Kelly, Colleen, and Bobby. So everybody played sports, and I think it was tougher for the ones that came after David and I because of the notoriety that we had received. And I will tell you, Andy, that I've been very fortunate with a lot of things, that being on teams that I've been able to earn some rewards and so forth. But, when you're in that big a family, you've got about 4 or 5 people coming home from games and, they won a game or they won a race or whatever. So, your win of your game was it as important as the other 2 or 3 other people. So we were always vying for attention.
I don't know how your mom and your dad, but I guess it fell most on your mom to kind of organize all that. You must have had a crazy calendar in your kitchen.
She was amazing how she got all of us to our events, not just school, but with all our sporting events and other events. And she was our biggest number 1 fan.
Amazing. You talked a lot in your book about having very strong male role models. I mean, you talked about Coach Wooden, of course, your dad, your brother David, your husband Don. Those were very strong men in your life, right? and you just spoke about your mom, but what other women were role models for you, either in your family or outside your family?
Well, certainly I was fortunate enough to have women role models, not only my mom, who is still my rock, and she's lost 4 children, I've lost 4 siblings, but to see somebody that had that kind of faith and to continue day after day is pretty amazing. To watch my sister Patty play and compete with all these different women. Patty was 8 years older than I was, but knowing that there were women playing basketball and softball and volleyball and excuse me, all these other sports. So I knew that there were women playing sports. But in 4th grade, I read a book on Babe Didrikson and Zaharias. And you can talk about, the men that I, watched play, but that's who we were exposed to on TV, whether it was football, basketball, or we didn't watch much baseball, but certainly Don came into my life later. But, we watched men's sports because that's all that was on TV. But watching my sister Patty play and all those other women compete, and then to read a book on Babe Didrikson and Zaharias, that's where my dream in 4th grade happened to be an Olympian. And I wanted to be an Olympian because the Babe did it. And she played, not only ran track and was in the 32 Olympics, but she played basketball and softball and was a part of the original LPGA. And so to read a book on a woman athlete, that really was not, you didn't see too many of that back in the 60s.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I remember a conversation on the podcast I had with your good friend, my good friend, Nancy Lieberman, who said, she had to go from Queens to the Bronx to Rucker Park to play with the guys because, the girls there was no competition, but there was nothing for her to aspire to professionally, and same thing for you. There was no women's professional league, right?
Well, we had Title IX too. I mean, yeah. we were fortunate to be products of Title IX. And the thing that I find a little unfortunate today, and I love the fact that there is a WNBA 25 years old, and other sports, whether it's, tennis, and you've got Serena that's doing unbelievable things on the tennis court still, and these young women in the LPGA, but you're not still, as much as there's more exposure, and because of Title IX, the scholarships and so forth, there's still none. And to hear women WNBA players say that Kobe Bryant or LeBron or Steph Curry, I want to hear about Diana Taurasi and Candace Parker and Jewel Lloyd and Sue Bird and I want to hear about the WNBA players. I think our basketball community on the women's side needs to do a better job of not just with basketball but with the other sports too. That we have some amazing women athletes, whether it be soccer, again, volleyball, surfing, skateboarding. There's women out there doing this, and we need to expose them to say, these are the role models that we need to look to. And I read the other day, I know that Sue Bird and a group of young women, which I think is fantastic, they're starting a new group called Together, which is a media company. But they're saying, well, young girls didn't have posters. I had a poster. I was fortunate enough that I had a poster at UCLA.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there were far and few between of women athletes having posters or having that recognition. But to say that young girls today don't have female role models. I don't want Jewel Lloyd to talk about Kobe in the sense of, I love Kobe. I think Kobe has been fantastic for the women's game because of Gigi and the WNBA and college basketball, but also women in sports in general. But there's a lot of women doing the work too. And I want young girls to say, I want to be like that person.
Well, coming from you, that should be the gauntlet that's thrown down. And I agree with you. I think there might be a little bit too much attention paid to the men's game. And, I have 3 daughters. I mean, they've all seen, the WNBA since the beginning, 2 generations. My older daughters were, part of the Lisa Leslie era. And now my youngest daughter is, part of, I guess, the Candace Parker era. We go to Sparks games and they love it. And they bring their friends. And I think that they're not thinking about the men when they're watching these women, these incredible athletes play on the same court, as the Lakers play. But they're not thinking about that.
Well, not only young girls, but young boys. But when the league started, Andy, I remember going to Huntington Beach and seeing a young boy have a New York Liberty number 11 Teresa Weatherspoon jersey on.
That's awesome.
And I thought, wow, how exciting.
Yeah.
And, you think about the Cynthia Coopers and the Cheryl Swoops and Lisa Leslies and Rebecca Lobos and Tina Thompsons and Katie Smiths. And, we've had some amazing women in the WNBA, and now they're kind of like forgotten about.
Right.
And, but I do love the young generation, but they don't know what these women did to get that league going. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's changes. There's always positive things happening. The salaries are getting better. But when you got somebody like Nneka Ogwumike, who, and all these, Natasha Cloud, and these women that have stood up, Renee Montgomery, who's now an owner of the Atlanta Dream. I mean, to have a woman and a woman of color to be an owner is huge. And to have these women speak, and I will say that the WNBA, and nothing to take away from the NBA, and I think Adam Silver has been unbelievable in the support, as David Stern was for the WNBA. And but the things that happened this past summer with social injustice, not only systemic racism, but systemic sexism in this country too, still exists. But to know that these women have been so powerful in their voices in speaking out, more so than the men, I would say. I mean, the men have spoken out, but the women really put things on the line. And they don't make the money that the men do.
Well, speaking of that, how did you feel when the new CBA was passed for the WNBA and tried to kind of elevate the salaries, and so that these women didn't have to play year round, they didn't have to go overseas? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Diana Taurasi took a year off of playing for the Mercury because she was making more money overseas. Right. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, it certainly has been a learning process, and in the 25 years of the WNBA, we're probably far ahead of the NBA when they started in their first 25 years. So we were probably making money. The WNBA was more money than when the NBA started back in 48. And you look at somebody like Bill Russell and the guys in the 50s that did sit out. I mean, he told me a story that, and Bill's been a wonderful friend also, told me a story that they had an all-star game and they weren't going to play. They're all in the locker room, and the owners came in and said, you got to play, you got to play. And they said, no, you haven't paid us. You haven't paid us. So, you got to make a stand. And certainly I think the WNBA with these women, and now you have more that are on, giving them credibility as far as their voice, whether it be Candace Parker on TNT, or whether it be Shanae Ogwumike on ESPN. And we've seen women in the past, but now it seems like that there's, a support system for them. And I think too that with this month and starting, I guess, next week, women in international support for women. And, women need to support women. Girls need to support girls. And I think that that's very important.
And you've been so many firsts in your life, your professional life. I mean, even college, four-time All-American. I mean, you were the first pick in the WBL. Then, of course, the very famous, everybody knows about the tryout that you had with the Pacers, right? And can we go back to that? I know you've talked about it a gazillion times, but reading your account of it in the book, you never, from what I read and from seeing other interviews with you, it wasn't like, this was a publicity stunt or you needed to get attention, right? You have a great quote, and I'm going to quote you. Okay. You said, quote, "I was no Joan of Arc. I simply wanted to play basketball and I wanted to play with the best," end quote. Right? That's it in a nutshell?
Well, I think I would like to think that when most athletes are doing something, they're just doing what they love. And somebody gave me an opportunity. I wanted to go to the 1980 Olympics. I had been on the 76 team, and you still had to be an amateur. Even though I was the number one pick in the WBL, I thought, well, if I wait one more year, I can go to the 1980 Olympics, and I can also finish up school at UCLA and get my degree, which I did. And so I was playing USA basketball at the time, and this call came in after we'd gotten back from Russia in the Spartacade games, and I'd been the captain. We'd won the World Championships that year in '79, and our team was coming together. Sue Gunner was going to be the Olympic coach, who was our assistant coach in '76. Billy Moore was our coach in '76, who coached my sister Patty at Cal State Fullerton to a championship, and then coached UCLA my senior year. We won a championship. So, all these little tie-ins. But, David was the number one pick for the Lakers. He was the number two pick in the NBA draft in 1975. So David and I received a lot of exposure at UCLA in 1975 when I was a freshman and he was a senior. That was Coach Wooden's last year at UCLA, and they won the championship. So David was an All-American, and, it was a human interest story with the media. that year in 75. And in Los Angeles, a lot of people knew who I was through my next years at UCLA with the Olympics and so forth. And Sam Nassy was a new owner of the Indiana Pacers. And I think that they had just come in recently into the NBA from the ABA. And you know, I look back now, Andy, and certainly publicity was involved, but you know, I was so young and immature and not understand. I didn't even know what a press conference was, and we had to do a press conference, and I was like, "What is that?"
Yeah.
And certainly was very attacked on that by the media, and I was surprised by it. But in saying that, you know, Sam felt that that was the first year of the 3-point line. And certainly it was the year that Larry Bird and Magic Johnson came into the league. And it received a lot of exposure for the Indiana Pacers. And Slick Leonard was the coach, did not want this circus going on in Indiana. And with the Pacers, I mean, he's old school and he played in the NBA, and this was not something that he was looking forward to. It was very difficult for him. He came out to Los Angeles to try and convince me not to do it. I go back to 5 years earlier when I was a senior in high school, and I had a lot of people talk me out of not playing on the boys basketball team my senior year in high school, even though it led to me being the first high school player on the USA basketball team. So I've always felt that, you know, God closes one door and opens up another.
Yeah.
And this was an opportunity that, even though I wanted to go to the 80 Olympics, this was an opportunity of a lifetime.
Right.
And most men don't get. I was not drafted. I was signed as a free agent. And certainly, as you well know, back in the 70s and 80s, the draft was a lot different than it is today. And what do we have, 17 rounds or something like that?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And they had a free agent rookie camp. And today you don't have that. Now you've got the G League. I mean, there's so many other different avenues. But and David was playing for the Milwaukee Bucks. You know, he was the #1 draft pick with the Lakers, and he was in that trade that brought Kareem to LA, and he went to Milwaukee, where my parents are from. So, you know, things kind of worked out. But I had a lot of support from my family. They were a little concerned, but my whole life I'd been playing the game of basketball and been playing against guys. So what I was doing was nothing different, but I was able to train and put myself in a good frame of mind. And I'm glad it wasn't happening today and social media didn't exist.
Yeah, I wonder what that would have been like. Were there women that came out? You didn't really talk about it in your book, but were there celebrities or other women in sports that came out to support you? Because you were getting barbecued by the press. I mean, which kind of shocked me a little bit. That I know that, you know, the media is kind of, in those days, was the old boys network, but you know, women in media.
Still is a little bit today.
Right.
But yeah, even the WBL, the WBL said, we've got, you know, the games passed her by. I was 24 years old, and we've got, you know, at least a dozen players better than her.
Yeah.
Only because I think that, and I didn't understand it at the time, it was a way for their league to get exposure. But I was hurt by it tremendously. I think Billie Jean King said something very positive. I do remember a reporter saying, you know, you're like the Jackie Robinson of women's basketball, coming out and doing this, and which was an unbelievable, you know, honor to have somebody say that. But I never felt that way because, like I said, I wasn't a flag bearer and didn't understand, though, my responsibility. But I think because of the character of the family I grew up with and my parents and their work ethic, and then going to UCLA and being exposed to, you know, just a standard of excellence, not just in the sports, but in the classroom. And I knew that character really was important. But I wasn't doing it for publicity. I was doing it because somebody gave me a chance. And to this day, I say it was the best decision I ever made. It did not work out the way I had hoped it would, but it worked out in a lot of great ways because I met Don.
Yeah, true. Do you ever think in your mind, you and your brother David, like if you had made it and you had to play against him in an NBA game?
I always played against him. You know, it wouldn't have been anything different.
Right, that would have been.
But I think David would have had a lot more minutes than me. And I don't think that people understand that if I had made the team, it wouldn't have been so much about, Andy, really what was going on the court. It was all the stuff off the court. You know, and certainly I probably would not have had a lot of minutes. I think even today, they can carry 15 guys on a roster. Back then in '79, you could only carry 11. And certainly back in the '70s, '80s, and even in the '90s, your ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th guy,
Mhm.
they didn't play a whole lot.
Mhm.
They didn't get a lot of time. And over the 82 game schedule of 48 minutes a game, they might have gotten 48 minutes the whole season.
Yeah.
So it was more of the things that would have happened off the court, being on the bench. I'm sure the media, wives and girlfriends, certainly the other players and other teams and coaches saying things as far as being in the locker room, being on the road, having dinner, having, just the innuendos. And I think, and I saw that a lot when I was at training camp in Indianapolis, and I had to isolate myself. I really did. I mean, the guys were great, but it was hard on them. They didn't know how to deal with this. And, but I had to isolate myself very much so, because you couldn't afford to even start any kind of rumor.
Yeah. So tell me what went through your mind then when you all of a sudden you're competing in the men's superstars. The first woman to compete in the men's superstars. I mean, did you just take that as this unbelievable challenge, or you felt like, hey, why not? Let's do it.
Well, another opportunity.
Yeah.
I tell people all the time, don't look back and say, what if, or I would have, should have, could have. Somebody gives you an opportunity to do something, go ahead and take it. If it doesn't work out, it'll work out in the sense of you've challenged yourself. And so when I was offered to compete after the first year in the Women's Superstars, I ended up coming in fourth because I'd been indoors, even though I played 7 sports in high school and I played several sports at UCLA. When you're indoors on the East Coast, I mean, you're just as white as a ghost and your conditioning is just on the basketball court. So then you go down to the Bahamas, you're in the sun and you've got to compete in, 8 sports or 7 sports in 2 days in the sun. So I came in fourth and I was not happy about it. So I came back the next year and I ended up winning the Women's Superstars 3 years in a row and being invited to the Men's Superstars. So to me, it was an honor. And to me, it was like, of course I'm going to, you've given me this opportunity. Of course I'm going to take it. And I will say that I did not come in last. I didn't come in first, but I didn't finish last either.
Yeah. I mean, you held your own for sure. Absolutely. What an experience that must have been, right?
It was great.
Incredible. I was so intrigued by when you talked about after you met Don that you took up golf. All right, let's do another sport. And that quote, there was no such thing as a friendly game between you and Don.
I had played a little bit of golf with my sister Patty, who was this unbelievable athlete. And I think the first time I ever swung a club, the club went further than the ball. And so I had no idea really how to play the game, but Don got me lessons, and that was a passion of his. And certainly when I got into it, I was very competitive. And Lou Rosanova, Don had introduced me to, and Lou got me down to a 6 handicap in like about 2 weeks after training with him. And, I thought, man, I loved the game. It was all about you and what you did. And yes, you're competing against other golfers out there, but it's you in the course. It's such a mental game. And, he helped me understand how to set up shots and your next shot and so forth. But yeah, when Don and I would play, it was, it was competitive.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that's good in a marriage to have. My wife and I played tennis.
Don showed me another side of how to raise the bar.
So tell me what intrigued you about broadcasting, Annie, because, now you've been doing it, I don't even know how many years, right?
40 plus years.
And you talk in your book very openly about, that your shyness might have been a hurdle to get over, but all of a sudden there you are, you're doing Pacer games, the first woman to broadcast a women's Olympic game, Olympic basketball in the '84 Olympics, right? All kinds of firsts in broadcasting. What was it about broadcasting that got your juices flowing?
Had no idea what I was going to do. As a sociology major at UCLA, again, Andy, I tell you, things just kind of fell into place for me. Whether it was getting a scholarship at UCLA with Title IX and, or, with basketball, but also competing in other sports. But just all through my life, I've been blessed in so many different ways and being in the right place at the right time. Certainly a lot of hard work has gone into it, but I ended up taking a class at UCLA, a broadcasting class. I had no idea. It was because UCLA is on the quarter system, you can take a class 3 quarters in a row. And I was able to do that with the Professor Art Friedman in this class. And Keith Erickson had been in this class, as Rayford Johnson had. And but Keith came back and spoke. And so knowing a lot of these different guys that had played for Papa at UCLA, and but I was not interested in this class whatsoever. As a matter of fact, a friend had to talk me into going to it. And you could only have about 12 people in the classroom, which usually at UCLA, you had about 200. So I had no interest, didn't want to be in front of a camera, because I was still pretty uncomfortable being interviewed by the media. I was actually the very first time when, being at UCLA, and David and I got interviewed a lot, I would literally shake my head yes and no. I wouldn't even say the words. That's how shy I was. But certainly I think taking this class and Professor Friedman really kind of, changed the direction really in the course of my life, because he made it fun. He made me come out a little bit and have a little bit of confidence, because it was something that maybe I could still be associated with the game, that I knew that I wasn't going to keep playing basketball because there was nothing out there for the women really. And but it just gave me another avenue. And then Bob Starr, who was in Southern California and did the Raider games, he produced all the Raider games. And what I realized too, back in the late 70s, was producing the UCLA men's games. But you remember in those days that when David played, I mean, we'd go back to his apartment and KTLA would cover those games, and they were tape delayed. So, by the time they were over, we'd get back, we'd watch the end of the 10 o'clock news, and then, the UCLA games would come on, and we'd watch his game. And that's how we would watch those games. But certainly, seeing these different announcers, whether it was Dick Enberg or Al Michaels that did UCLA and all these different people. But Bob Starr came to me in my senior year. And actually, really, the first one that really kind of talked me into maybe doing this was Tom Harmon and his son, Mark, who had played football at UCLA. And Tom just kind of took an interest with me. He was always around UCLA and so forth. And again, my name with David's name, and so people knew who I was, and broadcasters, and so Tom was also, I think, kind of steering me that way. But Professor Friedman got me into it, and then Bob Starr. Was it Bob Starr? No, that was goodness, but it was.
Who was your partner in Indiana when you first started doing it for the Pacers?
Oh gosh, I can see his name, Jim.
Yeah, we got to go back to the book.
Yeah, I can't think of his last name.
Yeah,
but I've worked with so many different people. And it was tough on a lot of the play-by-play guys, because they hadn't worked with women, and they really weren't sure about working with me, and so the respect factor wasn't always there.
Yeah.
But the door opened up for me, and I've been very fortunate. And I hustled for a lot of jobs. And also, when my tryout was with the Pacers was 1979, which also was the very first year of ESPN. So during that course, as I'm transitioning out of playing, certainly getting into broadcasting, they didn't have a lot of women. So I did softball for them, I did volleyball for them, I did basketball, I did men's basketball, and then when I went to Chicago. When Don was with the White Sox, I worked for the sports station there, and I did softball and baseball, and I did men's and women's basketball. I did sideline football. I did sideline baseball. I did wrestling. So I was a jack of all trades, which was a great training ground. But my very first job, really, as a broadcaster, was with the University of Hawaii at KGMB. Nice. So it was a great place to make a lot of mistakes, because it was off the mainland, and I really wasn't that good, and had to learn and get better. And Don convinced me to go to, after I'd met Don from the Superstars, he convinced me to go to the Don Martin School of Broadcasting. So that for a summer I did that, and that really helped also, but that no longer exists.
Yeah. Well, you've worked with some Hall of Fame partners. I mean, you talk about Chick Hearn, Keith Jackson. I mean, I reached out to my good friend, your good friend, Mike Breen, who,
Love Breeney.
Absolutely loved working with you. And he has a quote. He said, "One of the joys of my life has been able to work with you."
Wow.
And Mike,
he made me better. He made me a better broadcaster.
Yeah. And Doris Burke, of course. I mean, our good friend and my fellow, I went into I was honored by the Hall of Fame the same year. As Doris, and she, she says you led the way in so many regards for women. And, sometimes that could be, a little heavy of a burden, right? But it seems like you welcome that. You welcome the fact that you are out there, you're a trailblazer, you are, influence so many women in so many different areas, not just in sports, but in overall in life, right?
Well, I just think, Annie, I go back to my sister Patty and seeing all these women that didn't get recognized and knowing what Title IX was all about, and women that couldn't even get a college education, weren't even introduced to being able to be accepted into a college. And so I just was fortunate enough to come along at a time where I truly believe that not only myself, but women's basketball and women's sports wouldn't have received the recognition that it would have at that time without my brother David, without UCLA, without Coach Wooden, without Billy Moore, and without Kenny Washington, who was my freshman coach and played for Papa in the 60s in their first championship games. But, there's so many people that have really helped me along the way. There's no way I could have done this on my own. But I know that there are so many women that opened doors and didn't get recognized. So for me, Don always said that you're only as good as yesterday's paper. So, we move on. I mean, athletics was such an unbelievable fun time and joyous time in my life, and I loved it. And I love the hard work, and I love the dedication and sacrifices and so forth. But then you've got to move on in life, like everybody does, because sports only last so long. But in saying that, I know that there's so many young women, they don't know that I played sports. They don't have a clue who I am. Right. And I'm not on TV as much anymore. So you get somebody like Doris Burke who's on, or Chiney Ogumake, or Rebecca Lobo, and so forth. And I used to broadcast all those games for these kids. And now they're in the business, which is I think awesome. Yeah. And but having somebody like Billie Jean King out there, Chris Evert. Chris Evert is broadcasting. A lot of these young tennis players didn't know about Chris. Right. Even though she has her own academy and so forth. Yeah. But she's relevant because she's on air. Right. And but Martina's not on air, and people they don't even know Martina's game, and Martina was unbelievable. Or Steffi Graf, But I'm thinking of Billie Jean King. I'm thinking of Chris Evert. That Billie Jean especially is very, very active on social media, right? And these days you have to be. You mentioned Chiney, Sue Bird, all of the great women of this generation. And I'm not. And you're not, right? Not. But yet, and it doesn't seem like it really phases. My daughter gets so upset at me. What can we do to do more social media, Mom? What do you want? What do you need to do? It's like going, it's not in my blood for that. And yet I know if I was more active on it, I would be more relevant. Well, that's why you're on the Legends of Sport podcast, Annie. That's so right. Thank you, get the word out. So, thank you, Annie. I really need to talk about resiliency and being able to overcome challenges in life, because it's such a important thing for all of us. Of course, we've all had challenges. You've had some profound challenges. I mean, the fact that you lost Don, you were 38 years old, you had 3 little kids at home, and you had to be all of a sudden the breadwinner, right? And the grief and everything that goes along with it. I mean, I'm thinking of my dear friend Vanessa Bryant, what she's going through, the shock of losing her husband like that with 3 daughters at home. How did you do it? A husband and a child. And a child, yeah, exactly. How did you do it? Because you talk about in the book that it was 3 years of just, you don't really know how you got through it, right? No, well, I know through faith, family, and friends. Absolutely. Yeah. My faith because of my mom and seeing what she had gone through. And every day she got up. I was fortunate to have 3 beautiful children. Our sons, DJ and Darren, and our daughter, Drew. Yeah. The boys were 5 and 3, and our daughter was 3 months. So I knew I had to get up for them. And certainly being an athlete, certainly coming from a big family, I think that you see how people have to do things in order to get it done, no matter how sore they are or not feeling well, or it just got done. My mom got up every day, as my dad did, and seeing my brothers and sisters going out and working. But I knew I had to get up for them and push forward. Certainly a lot of down days and a lot of doubt whether I had been doing the right thing or not. And and you still look back in your life and think, could I have done things differently and made it better for them?
Yeah.
But my family was there every step of the way, as Don's family was too.
Mm-hmm.
His mom and dad were still alive at the time, and his daughter Kelly, and certainly his sister Nancy. But both families were very instrumental in those first couple of years afterwards and so forth. But and I think I look at them and I'm so proud of how they've turned out in the sense of the expectations of others. Because DJ Don Jr. was born on Don's birthday, so it was hard not to call him Don after his father. But I know that he struggled early on because of who his father was and what people said about him. Oh, you're Don Drysdale's son, or you're Don Drysdale. And certainly my daughter too, with you gonna play basketball like your mom. And my son Darren you didn't tell people his last name. But now there's so many people that they don't know who Don Drysdale is. They don't know who Ann Meyers is. And so, they've had to grow into these young, beautiful people who they are. And they've gone through some struggles themselves, but the decisions that they're making in their lives and so forth. And, you just hope that you can teach them to be kind to others, to have faith and to have hope. You always have to have hope.
Yeah.
And
make the right choices, right?
And we don't always make the right choices.
Yeah. Right.
But you live with those choices and you learn from those choices. And certainly I think that's, I've been able to have enough people in my life with guidance to help me along the way.
Yeah, I used to love seeing you with Drew. She was tagging behind you all the time. And you'd be broadcasting and she'd be like right over there,
And people were great in the stands. I mean, people would watch my kids when the NBA started.
Yeah.
And I would always take one on each trip. DJ would get to go to Houston, or Darren would get to go to Washington, and Drew got to go everywhere. And but people loved watching the kids for me. And now what I think is so awesome, especially with the WNBA, we see it, and we see it in the women's soccer league too, is that we have so many mothers in the league, and to see these children come together because of who their mothers are, playing a sport that they love.
Yeah, I love that because I photographed Candace Parker from her rookie year, and then she had her daughter as an infant.
She had her after Lisa.
Yeah, it was at Lisa, of course, too. I mean, it warms my heart.
Cheryl Swoops was the first.
Yes,
and people said, "Well, how can you play basketball after that?" And they always doubted women. They still talk about that. But Helen Darling, who played for the Cleveland Rockers, had triplets. And Taj McWilliams, she had her daughters 11 years apart.
Yeah,
and played till the age of 44.
Yeah. Well, I always kid JaVale McGee about being the second best player in his family, I mean, what a threesome that was at USC, right? The McGee twins and Cheryl, my God. Yeah. Well, listen, Annie, you've been unbelievably generous with your time. I mean, we can go on forever and ever, but I would like to get one last thing from you. We're putting together a compilation of memories that people have of Kobe, maybe a personal memory, something just sticks out with you that crossed your path that you'd want to share with all of us today.
Well, Kobe obviously was important to a lot of people in Los Angeles in the world of basketball. There's too many memories, but I know that he was, I think the first time I met him was when he was with the Lakers, and his dad, Joe, was coaching the LA Sparks. And so Kobe would come to the practices. I remember seeing him in China at the 2008 Olympics. And literally it was almost like Moses parting the Red Sea when he was coming down in the stadium, and all the Chinese audiences in the stands, he was coming down the stairs in the stadium, and everybody just opened up for him. I mean, he was just so well loved throughout the world. Towards the end, he had asked me to come to his practices, with the girls and with Gigi, and we never quite worked it out, but would run into him at a women's college game, and he was always so generous with his time. And he knew who I was. After the Suns game, when he came, and the last game in Phoenix, and with Devin Booker and so forth, that great relationship and that great story that they developed between each other. But I went back to the locker rooms afterwards, but he was so generous with his time with me. I was asking for him to sign a pair of shoes for Diana Taurasi, who, he had named Diana the White Mamba, and wanted to get those shoes signed for Diana. But he was so generous with his time, and certainly missed by so many.
Yeah, for sure. I remember Devin Booker's rookie year, and he was one of the guys that Kobe kept his eye on. Booker
and I would say that he is the most like Kobe right now.
Yeah, and he has the same kind of temperament. It's got an edge to him, but his game is unbelievable, right? Yeah. I want to leave you with one quote to further embarrass you from our good friend Rick Welts, right? Who I adore, one of my great friends, right? Rick says about you, she says, Annie lights up any room she enters and seems to be on a mission to spread positive energy to everyone who comes in contact with her. So enough said, my good friend Annie, because it's such a pleasure and an honor to talk to you and to read your book, because I kind of knew your story, but I didn't know it from your perspective. So my 12-year-old is now going to read this book.
Thank you, Andy.
So don't be surprised if she does like a paper or report about you, for a biography.
Send it, and I'll when we see each other, I'll sign it for you.
Absolutely. So great to see you, and good luck with everything with the Suns and the Mercury. I forgot to tell you that we had Paul Westhead on a few weeks ago, and he relived that great 2007 championship. And
he was wonderful. And just his mindset in telling players, don't worry, we're in it. You're down 10 or whatever, 2 minutes left. And he was just such a calming factor. And the Mercury players loved playing for him. And then Corey Gaines, who had played for Paul at Loyola and was his assistant for years and won a championship, same kind of attitude.
Yeah, well, one of my favorite places to go for Mercury and Suns games. So hopefully after this pandemic, I'll be able to travel out to the Valley and
that'd be great.
And be where I belong, right on the baseline, instead of watching it on TV.
I know it. We need you.
Yeah, well, it's so great to see you, Annie, and please say hi, especially to Drew, because I didn't really know your sons that well, but I remember Drew and how are they doing, by the way? I mean, everybody's good and different parts of the country, or where are they?
Yes, my son DJ and his wife live in Scottsdale, so I get to see him in Arizona. And,
that's good.
My son Darren had to postpone his wedding from last year because of COVID. So hopefully he and his fiance Sam will be getting married this November. And then my daughter Drew graduated from UCLA, and she's got a dog at home, and so that's been a great relationship. And so she's so talented in so many different ways, and so she's still going out there and finding her way.
Well, please send her my love.
I will, Andy. Thank you so much.
All right, Andy. So great to see you, and hopefully I'll see you soon.
You
right?
got it.
Okay. Thank you. Well, a huge thanks to Ann Meyers Drysdale for taking the time to share her story with us today. I always love seeing Annie on the sidelines at NBA or WNBA games, and I hope to get to Phoenix when the pandemic is over and to see her in person. No better legend than Annie to help celebrate Women's History Month. You can learn more about Annie in her autobiography, You Let Some Girl Beat You, which I thoroughly enjoyed and totally recommend. Thanks also, as always, to my producer and researcher, Veronica Ahn. And thanks to everyone for continuing to download and subscribe to our podcast. A reminder that you can find us on the LA Times app and online, as well as your favorite podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. And keep following us on social media. Our Instagram is @LegendsOfSport. Our Twitter @legends_of_sport, our blog, legendsofsport.blog, and our TikTok and YouTube channels, Legends of Sport. You can find my photography on Instagram @ADBPhotoInc. So thanks, everyone. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another great guest and episode. Please check our social media for the announcement of who we have coming up. Until then, stay safe, stay well, and what do I hear? Wear your mask. Okay? Gotcha. See you guys.